Hey, this is Josh from the Appleboys Podcast, and this is the 5th attempt to get you to listen to the Bleach Bros Podcast. I suck at intros. These guys suck at podcasting. Come back and get sanitized.
Welcome into the Bleach Brothers Podcast. This is B-Word, and as usual, I am here with my good buddy Jake. Jake, how are you tonight, my man?
You know, I'm okay. I'm just okay. It's been a little bit rough. It's funny because we had this rundown written, and it couldn't be more pertinent to me.
Yeah.
So I actually got an old man disease this week, to be open. I got shingles.
Yep.
Which sucks.
Yeah.
Also because it's on my face and in my eye, which makes it worse, which I learned, I learned a lot about myself with it, but I also learned a lot about, a virus. Like when something happens, like you learn and you get into it, right? Like, why do I have this? How does it affect me? And so, like, to be honest, if I can get into the little story about it, how I found out, I went and got my hair cut, went to work Friday, right? Everything, came home, and then all of a sudden, like the lymph node behind your ear, that little bump.
Yeah.
It was really fucking sore. It's like, man, what is going on? Like, maybe I'm getting sick. Maybe I'm getting a sinus infection. Then I went to sleep. I woke up and my ear was killing me. Like, when you have an ear infection, and then the lymph node, like right near your jaw in front of your ear, that was swollen and sore. And then everything just started swelling up and getting sore. And I'm like, what the fuck? Well, then Saturday night, I reach on the top of my head on the left side, and I got all these giant, like, blistery bumps, and they're starting to show up all over. The funny thing was, I got a haircut at my normal shop, but a different barber, right? So instantly I'm thinking I have a flesh-eating virus because it's in my eyebrows and on my head where this woman cut my hair, and it's behind my ear. So I'm thinking she used dirty equipment, and I was like, I'm going to be one of those horror TLC TV show stories, right? Like I died from a haircut or something, right? So I'm feeling my head. I don't know what's going on. My wife's like, let's see how it goes the next day. Next day I wake up, I got the worst headache of my life. Feels like somebody hit me in the face with a baseball bat. My eye is almost swollen shut. They're red. They're puffy. These blisters are massive. It's like I'm breaking out with this disease, right? So she's like, all right. So she gets home from work that night. She goes, oh my God, you look terrible. I was like, yeah. So she goes, all right, tomorrow morning, if you're not feeling better, we'll go to the doctor. So I wake up. She goes, you look like shit. And I did. It was bad. So I drove myself over to the doctor. Luckily, nobody was there. I got there at like 7 a.m. Walk right in. Right when I sit down, the doctor walks in. She goes, you got shingles. I was like, fuck, what? Barely looked at me. She goes, oh, I've had it before. I know what you have. She goes, the funny thing is it's only going to affect your left side because it only affects one side. And you can describe this to the fans too, B-Word. I have a line in the middle of my forehead where I'm angry all the time, the hater line. I looked like Harvey Dent where it went right down that line and just stayed to the left. Now, get all my meds and everything. Of course, I get told, men that are older usually have this because I'm only 38, so I probably shouldn't. So it came down to stress levels that I need to learn to calm the fuck down.
Well, what's funny about that is that this week, as you opened up with, was not a week really that kind of helped you out at all, because not only were you sick, but there was a whole bunch of personal stuff happening, and we don't need to get into all that. And for us, behind the curtain, we normally record on Wednesdays, and we usually record Hateful Gnome first, and then we end up recording Bleach Bros. And Gnome sent us a message that says, hey, he doesn't know if he's going to be able to get home to meet with the band. So we reach out to the band that we're recording with Hateful Gnome, and they've got some personal issues going on. And here I am. The only care or concern that I have is that I'm fucking buried in snow, and I'm just bitching about snow all day, every day. And here we are. So, this is kind of an appropriate week, I guess, to try to talk about how to handle struggles and how to keep your mentals going.
Yeah, I will say this about you, and I wanted to get in one more thing about the stuff I'm dealing with is, it's your fault there's snow in Carson City, so everybody listening there, blame B-Word, because he won't stop sharing stupid memes of like, you know what I wanted? More snow on snow. You did it to yourself. You did, it's like I gave myself shingles because I'm a fucking worked up mess, right? I know I did this to myself. I should be better. You did the snow. I blame you for that. I should call the weather station and tell them it's just called a B-Word blizzard. The funny part is I get all my meds, right, Bjord? And I'm just want to jump into this one part. And I always find it funny, like, you know, they always say, like, if you get meds, there's the side effects or all that, right? My favorite one is the doctors explaining to me how I need to calm down, like less stress, all that stuff, right? Like help myself out. And she goes, we're going to give you this steroid. And she goes, however, this steroid is going to make you agitated and angry at everything. And I'm like, why are you giving, and I'm already the hater. So I'm like, why are you giving me this? Because this is, and I came home, dude, and I took that and like, I'm weaning off it. Right. And my wife, like later in the night goes, that doctor's orders was exactly correct. You were a prick for the rest of the day to all coworkers, to everybody. I was a fucking asshole, dude.
Well, it's funny too, because I stayed out of your way this week. I knew that you were dealing with shit and I didn't want to get involved. Basically just said, look, we can record a different night if you want. And what was Wednesday became Thursday. What was Thursday became Friday. And here we are finally connecting. But it's good because I actually got to watch a couple things that I wanted to watch. Got to watch some new documentaries and stuff. I actually got to hang out with my kid for a little bit this week. Nice. She just moved into a new apartment with her boyfriend. And so I went over there and hung out and intimidated her boyfriend, or at least tried to. And he cooked me a steak. It was actually pretty good. So nothing wrong with any of that. But man, we as dads tend to deal with quite a bit of struggles. You know, I know that your daughter, your oldest specifically, and my daughter have dealt with some shit that, you know, we don't need to talk about on the show. But as a dad, it's like, holy shit, man. Like, how do we deal with this, right? Like, number one, we're a different gender. Like, and I realize people, you're going to say that there's 48 genders. I'm going to hot take here. There's two. Jake and I are one. They're called males. Our daughters are the other. They're called females.
Oh, I thought you were going to say like we're one, like we're combined, like a Megazord. Like
no,
penis man.
No, with our powers combined. But no, man. I mean, for us raising daughters specifically, like we come across shit that we're just like, why are you so emotional about this? Why are you dealing with
just
this?
Fix it. Like, not to interrupt you, but it was funny because I was a girl dad first, and now I have a son, and he's 2. But it was funny tonight. I was watching him, right, and he had a problem, and he walked over. He has a little fake workbench in the living room, right, in the giant living room where he could play. And he goes, Steel's hurt. Steel has a problem, and he started taking a screwdriver and bolting these things to his legs. Yeah, and it just made me think, like, that's men, like that's the gender that we want to fix the problem. Like when my wife's crying or my daughter's crying and she's emotional and we're trying to talk through it, I'm like, okay, what can we do to fix and solve this? Mm-hmm. Like, let's see the course of action and get through it. Now, it's not always correct because as men, and I could be speaking for you too and tell me if I'm out of turn, but we want it resolved as fast as possible. Yep. Right. We want it like done. Like, let's do this and just be done with it.
Why are you waiting to handle this? Just get it done.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because my daughter, you know, when she went down to college, she ended up joining a fraternity. Well, when she came back home, sorority, whatever. When she came back home, she was no longer a part of the sorority per se, but she still had sorority dues, right? So she's got this bill. It's like $300. It's not the end of the world, but she has not paid on this thing at all. But the problem is that they send me the email and they're like, hey, the bill's due. Hey, the bill's due. First off, I don't know how they got my email. Okay, maybe it's because I'm her parent or guardian or whatever. Right. But the other part of it is, it's like, just pay the damn bill. Like, you could have paid the bill 3 times over at this point. Just pay the bill. And so it's funny because I met up with my daughter this week and we're talking about a whole bunch of different stuff and we're having a good time. And I said, hey, I got another bill for your sorority. Have you paid on that? And she goes, well, no, because there's a pause for student loans. And so they said that I didn't have to pay it because, you know, there's a pause for school spending. And I said, just pay the fucking thing off.
It's done.
Like, it's just be done with it. Yeah. Like, just handle your shit. And it's just funny, man, because I think part of it is that we've had almost 40 years of experience on this earth. And with our kids, we're sitting here dealing with their problems with our experience going, okay, you should do this or you should do that, whether we're communicating it like that. But we're also sitting here saying, look, if I could do this over again, this is what I would have done. And here's why. And it's funny because my daughter, I love her to death. She's like the most important person in my life. But she has the case of the I knows. Like, I'll try to tell her something. She's like, I know. It's fine. I know. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, just listen to me once. Just one time. Just listen to me.
It feels like, and I'm not going to say it this way, but it feels like it starts at 8.
Yeah.
And it never ends. Like, I mean, it will eventually, but like right now, Lila's my oldest, and she's going through something right now. She's in a little trouble. So we actually had a talk at the dinner table tonight. And I'm not going to get into specifics, but I'll say this. It was funny because I started out where I was essentially like, look, you're going to screw up. I screwed up. And sometimes I go into like a story example because I feel like I'm a good storyteller or whatever, but I try to show her like, I'm expecting you to fuck up. Like I'm expecting that to happen. All I care about is what did you do? Own up to it. How do we fix it? And what's the game plan going forward? Again, straightforward.
Yes.
Let's just fix this fucking problem.
Yeah.
And instead I get, my daughter's in the I don't know phase, not the I know. Mine's
Right.
the I don't know because everything's well, why'd you do it? I don't know. Well, what do you want to do? I don't know. Like, well, do you know anything? I don't know. And so the I know thing happens, I think, when she just, is just a teenager, is like, get out of my way, Dad. But my daughter's in the I don't know phase, which one's worse, B-word? The I don't know or the I know?
I don't know.
I know.
I don't know. You know, honestly, which one I think is probably the worst is the one where they're asking you all the questions and they're like, hey, what's this? Hey, why is this that way? And you answer the question and they go, why? Well, because. Why? Because that's how it works. But why?
That's a stressful thing that I actually deal with as a dad. And if we'll get into that part, is it's funny. I've tried to catch myself with a few things, especially with my littler children, right? Because like I have that big gap. Like Lila's 14, Adeline's 5, and Steele is 2. So I have that gap between where it's like I'm trying to wrangle them all in and tell them like, hey, you're the big sister, you're the guidance, and this and that. But then my 5-year-old really wants to hang out with my 14-year-old all the time. And so it makes it hard, right? But the stressful thing for me with the littles is when they're doing that thing where they're asking, and I used to have the bad habit of I would say I don't know because I just wanted to get it over with, and I just got stressed out. Like, I don't know. Like, she'd be like, why is Pluto the smallest planet in the forest? And then finally, like after 19 questions, she's like, I don't know. And you just say it to get out of the conversation. So I understand that's probably what she's doing, but she starts out that way. It's not like it's a buildup. So I really catch myself doing that and try to improve on that. I've tried to be patient, but I actually read an article years ago, and I'm sure I've talked about this on the show, but it's one of my favorite things I ever learned. And I was reading this article about a dad who said he made his children grow up too fast.
Yeah.
And I remember me and you would have a lot of conversations because we've been best friends. We're about the same age, but I've always looked up to you as a dad because you started as a dad way earlier than me, teenage dad. And we're going to get into that part. But I would call you a lot and say, I'm dealing with this. Like, how do I deal with this? Or, and you sort of helped fast track this as well. Like, they're going to grow up fast. Like, you have to deal with this. But I read this article where this guy was talking about how he was walking through the zoo trying to get to a train with his kids. And the whole time his little kid is just stopping him, like looking at flowers, like, Dad, look at this flower, smell it. And he's like, we got to go. We got to get to the train. And he's like rushing his kid. Mm-hmm. And he writes like this article, and it's essentially a 20 minutes in time, but it's a long article. And he's explaining like how this kid just keeps trying to stop and learn the world. And all he's doing is rushing. And he goes, and then we get to the train and I'm thinking, all we're going to do is sit and ride it across the zoo. We have nowhere to be today. We're at a zoo. Why am I telling them they have to rush to go see an orangutan when they're interested in this right now and they can learn about this?
Yeah.
And that was a very important lesson for me to learn, to slow down and not always, and it's helped me in a lot of places in life, but not always be in a rush. Like, why am I in a hurry to get in the car to get somewhere to sit in a parking lot or vice versa? I mean, you know me, B-word, I'm not a person that runs late. Right. I understand if you're running late, that's a different circumstance. But like when it's the weekend and I'm taking my kids to the beach, I have tried to be better than just like yelling at them to get in the car and focus and do this. It's like, because at the end of the day, I'm going to the fucking beach. Like, I don't need to rush to get there. I don't need to be there right now.
Right.
And so that was a very important lesson for me to be a less stressed dad. But B-word, what stresses do you think, and maybe you need to go through it for me when I'm asking you in order of like years, like, what are probably the most stressful things of being a dad?
Oh, man. For me, being a teenage dad, so for those that don't know, I was a couple weeks out of being 18 years old when my daughter was born. And that was life-changing, dude. Number one, I was trying to figure out how to be in a relationship. Like, we just don't, we're not programmed with it, especially those of us from broken homes. So we just don't understand how that works. So I'm trying to figure out how to be a good boyfriend, fiance in this minute, but also being 17 years old with all the things that you want to do at 17, right? So the being in school or trying to do the things that you like, maybe it's playing the video games or, playing on the computer or whatever, because you're still a kid. And I remember when my daughter was born, it didn't feel real until the day she was born. And I think a lot of dads can actually, especially first-time dads, can actually relate to that a lot because we're not the ones that are carrying the child, right? So it's something that's just fascinating when they're finally born. I remember just being overcome with emotion when my daughter was born. Instantly was crying, and it wasn't like a scared cry. It wasn't like a, oh my God, what did I do cry? It was just like this beautiful moment mixed with, I have no clue what the fuck that I'm doing.
Yeah.
And so like that was probably one of the hardest times, but also one of the most blissful times because you just don't know what's happening in that moment.
Well, and I want to speak on that for a second because I remember that was part of the thing that we talked about when I was having my first kid. Because my first daughter was born when I was about 24. So I was still young. I was still trying to figure out life, what I was going to do. I had to go back to college, all that. I had to move up here. But it was funny because people would tell me, oh, you're not really a dad yet. And I'm like, no, I'm having a kid. Like I go to the sonograms, I do the Lamaze, I do all the shit. And it's funny until you hold them in your hands. And I actually hate this argument now, and I'm not going to try to get political, but it's that whole pro-life thing. Like, since they're not in your hands, are they really? But whatever.
Right.
So I have a hard time talking to some people about it now because that sparks a whole nother argument. But every time I talk to somebody who's going to be a new dad, I remember my old boss. He's younger than me, and he was like, oh man, I'm excited and everything, but I don't know what to do. And I was like, you're not going to know. You're not going to know how your wife feels. You're not going to be able to be empathetic to a lot of those things, like, because you don't understand, because she's already a mom. She's a mom right now. She's carrying it. And it's almost like fortuitous to say carrying, because the minute you carry and hold your baby, you're a dad, and you look at them and you're like, holy shit. Yeah. And my life instantly changed. I will say for dad stresses, I'm happy I had a girl first. Not that I don't think I would screw up like a son or anything, but I think it really helped me. I think it really helped me slow down and notice different things about myself and how I should act and how I should treat people and all those. And I think, and I'm not saying it's wrong if somebody, out of order or anything, but for me, it was helpful to have a daughter first. But it's, I mean, if we can speak on that, pregnancy is stressful. Pregnancy is stressful, especially for young guys trying to figure out what the hell they're going to do with their life. Because the whole time,
there's no way that we know what's going on.
No, but it's not. And it's, as men, we're typically providers, right? So my whole stress was so high to the roof of like, how the fuck am I going to afford this? How am I going to provide for this? How am I going to support it? What if I'm a terrible dad? What if I'm not good with a girl? What the fuck tampons do I buy? All that shit goes into play where you're already planning out 18 years. It's funny. As soon as you have a kid, you plan out 18 years ahead already of how you're going to go about it. And that changes drastically.
Well, and as a teenage parent, I got to be honest with you, man. The entire pregnancy felt like I was on trial. It felt like I was on trial, and I knew I was going to be convicted of a crime, and eventually I was going to have to pay the crime, and the crime was 18 years, right?
Well, exactly.
Like, that's the sentence. And so the entire time, like, that was my thought process. But I will tell you this: when my ex-wife was pregnant, I talked to her belly all the time, like when she was pregnant. I, just whisper to the baby and talk to the baby and read books and that sort of stuff, just because I thought that was what you did. I thought that was, how you start to become a dad. And what I will tell young fathers, if you don't spend that belly time while she's pregnant, you're really missing out. Because I will tell you, when my daughter was born, she came out of the womb crying and, just like all babies do, or most babies do. And they handed her to me. And the moment I looked down on her and I said, "Hi, baby," she instantly recognized my voice. Her eyes opened up and she stopped crying. And for me, that was such a beautiful moment that's not something that I could ever replace, if that makes sense. And that was all the investment that I spent doing that. So I was really happy with that. But I agree with you, man. Trying to empathize with somebody who's pregnant is just so rough for us as men. And then we also have that burden of, we're the providers, right? We've talked about, the stresses on guys before, and we're going to get into a little bit more in this episode. But that's a really taxing topic for guys, especially when you have always provided, or you've always had that diligence to go out and work. And now you have more mouths to feed, like now it's a whole new stress.
Yeah, it's nice too, because I found myself, I connect more with other dads in the sense of not just because, oh, I'm busy and I got to watch the kids, but it's like we're friends with the dads on Dayquill, no puns intended, but it's like we all talk like in our own chats about our dad times or what's going on or our kids and make the jokes and do that. And it's funny because every piece of advice I've gotten, I've used, good or bad. I've given the same advice, and it feels like men have been doing a good job, at least in my circles, and a lot, of passing down the appropriate knowledge to each other to help with that stress. And maybe it's because men, the joke is we're simpler creatures. I mean, essentially, go get rock, hit a mammoth in the head, eat, fuck, go to sleep, right?
Yeah.
Take care of family. That's the basic, maybe come on carpet. I don't know, AJ, shout out to you. But the fact that the advice is like handed down, and it's because it's the same stresses, the simple stresses of you will go through this. Oh, I went through that. You will go through this. Oh, I went through that. And not saying that every little detail of life is the same, but that is a comforting fact of being a dad, that the dad stresses like my grandpa, not my father, but, like me and you became closer when you got your ex-wife pregnant because you lived with me for a while.
Yeah.
We tried to help you out. And I mean, it's like, I looked at you, and that's why I looked up to you, because I was like, you looked at me when we started talking. I was like, I don't even know what you're gonna fucking do, dude. Like this is scary. It's scary for me. Like, what are you gonna do? And we had those conversations at night, and I'm so proud of what you've done. But I'm not trying to make it seem like dad stresses are easy. But in my opinion, if I could say it, I think they seem easier, but there's a lot of weight with them.
I would agree with that. I would say that they're manageable. I would say that that's the definition that I would say. I wouldn't say that they're easy. I would say that they're manageable. For both you and I, you've not been divorced. You've been privileged in that sense where you've only been married once to your beautiful wife now. But you did have a baby with an ex, right? And so you had to go through the whole custody battle. And I had to go through numerous custody battles. And you and I later in life started to bond over some of that stuff too, because we spent a lot of time talking with each other on, hey man, what circumstance are you dealing with and how can you help me through it? Or here's what I'm dealing with. Can you talk with me about it? You and I've had a number of conversations where we've been down and out as dads. Like we've reached our limit. We want to give up. Like we'll never give up. Like, let's clarify that. But we feel like we want to give up. And I'm, we don't talk politics really on this show at all, but I'm just going to tell you one thing. When it comes to women's rights, like I don't really much care what people do in their houses. But what I will tell you is that I thought that my escape route was abortion. I was really asking my ex to do an abortion because I was 17 years old, and how's a child going to raise a child? And I'm so thankful that she didn't do that. Even though all of the stresses that came with it, all of the tears that came with it, all of the late nights, all of the early mornings, all of the court battles, I would do that again in a heartbeat because of the daughter that I have. And so I don't want to sit here and say, Bleach Bros is pro-life or pro-choice or whatever. That's neither here nor there. What I will say is that in any situation, that there's always an option and there's two sides to every coin. And so I will just go ahead and say that. But as dads, dude, we've dealt with some hard times. You're going through that teenage route. You asked me when we started the show, what was another hard time? That teenage route is tough, dude. When your child starts to become independent and they no longer depend upon you for either advice or guidance or their, assistance with decision making, they make a lot of mistakes. And it's hard as parents to allow them to make mistakes, but also more importantly, to allow them to face the consequences. Like my daughter's made some pretty good sized mistakes in her life, and I've had to allow the consequences and really say, you're facing the music for your choices. And that's what's happening. Regardless of A, B, or C, you made your bed, you're going to sleep in it. Now, as a dad, I'm never going to harm her. I'm never going to let her be harmed. Right. So there's always that, to what extent, and then I'm going to save her kind of thing. But she has to learn those boundaries. And especially as a teenager, like where Lila's at right now, Lila's learning what those boundaries are. And obviously she's living in two different households. And so those boundaries are different in both of those households right now. And so that causes quite a bit of confusion, and it causes quite a bit of, oh, I can get away with this here, so I'm going to do it here, but I'm not going to do it over here because I know I'm going to get caught. And it's just this counterbalancing. So the one thing that I will say for those people who have co-parenting situations, and you'll probably agree with this, Jake, if you can set aside whatever issue you have with the other parent, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what it is. It's so petty. And you can choose to become the best co-parent as possible. You're doing the absolute best for that child. And that's solid advice right there.
Yeah, I'll agree with you on this because it's like, I don't need to be friends. I don't need to go have dinners. We don't need to do the joint birthday parties, but can we be cordial in a room and get along and, not to be cliche, but have that it's for the child mentality at the end of the day? Like, we all have a strong front for the kid. Does it always feel fair? No. Does it always feel right? No. You're going to do things wrong. They're going to do things wrong. It's always your side of the story that wins, right? As you said, two sides of the coin. But I would agree with you there. Another good point you made was, you'll never let them harm themselves. You won't harm them. Like, you'll let them. I find it funny because when you have a baby, right? And like, or, a kid, a toddler, and they're at the park. I was that dad, if they go pick up gum off the bottom of the bench, I let them put it in their mouth to learn, like, don't do that, right? Hopefully they don't enjoy it, but you get what I'm saying? Right. It's funny though, because the older they get, you always like have that mentality of like, oh, I let them go do more, but technically I'm letting her do less, if that makes sense. Like when they're a little toddler, I'm right next to them, but I'm letting them eat dirt and do stupid things and learn from those. Because also I know those mistakes are less harmful. So as a teenager, it's like you have a longer leash, but it's a lot tighter around you because I know the thing that you could do is a lot more damaging for your future.
Right. We're both, I would consider us both experienced parents. Like, I know that you're still in the middle of the cruise, right? I've passed the finish line as far as for the raising and rearing of the child, right? But for fathers that are out there who might be struggling with fatherhood, or for fathers who are out there that are becoming new fathers, what sort of advice would you offer?
Learn to listen if you don't. Learn to accept failure if you're not good at it. That was one thing. I was a very competitive man, a sports guy. So for me, it's that athletic mentality of always winning. Everything always has to have a right and wrong. There's no gray area. Learn the palette of life. And that is that there are many spectrums of gray out there for you to realize that not everything needs to be so cut and dry. But for me, it would essentially just be have patience, listen more, and accept failure. And that's whether it's from yourself, or your children or others, because you also mainly, those three things are going to help you slow down and enjoy it because it does go fast. Like, it's a joke. I used to say, like, when your kid's a baby, you're just like, and you're tired, and you're dealing with that whole thing or changing diapers, getting up, doing all that. You're just like, man, can you just walk and get things for yourself? Or, you have those wishes. And then the minute they start moving, you're like, can you just sit in a stroller again and never move? It's like, and that's where I had to realize, like, I'm not enjoying this. I'm just either looking for the next thing or wishing it would go back instead of just being like, okay, here's where I'm at. And, maybe it's because, I had multi-children and it does change an attitude a little bit, I think. But I enjoy it more. I think we lose track of enjoyment of what kids can be and also how much you can learn from them too. Like, that's the whole listening part. But that's the advice I'd give. What about you, Beaver? Especially, I want to ask you it in this way first. What would you give advice? Because I've realized we have a lot more teenage listeners now, especially from my daughter's high school, I found out. So there's a lot of young men I know that are listening. What advice would you give them besides put a condom on or just don't? To if they became a dad or if there's some young fathers out there?
I think that there's a couple things that I would tell to teenagers. And if you are listening to us and if you are a teenager, man, do your parents know? But aside from that,
fucking A, right.
But aside from that, look, I think for a long time I called, and I didn't mean to like refer to her as this, but for a long time I said I made a mistake getting my ex-wife pregnant, and we were in high school and I had so much to look forward to. And I had so much that I was, preparing for collegiately and militarily. I was going to go into the military, and, there was a whole bunch of things that I had planned for my life. And the moment that she became pregnant was the moment that all of that stopped. Now I had a few choices. I had a choice to say, okay, I made a mistake and I'm going to face the music. I had a choice to say, I'm walking away. Or I had a choice to just pretend like nothing happened, right? And I think the character of a man is defined in their actions more than what they say. And I would say that for those people who are dealing with a circumstance, whether you are becoming a teenage father, or whether you even knocked up somebody by accident, you are part of the cause, and you can be part of the solution. And so I would say, number one, face the music. The music might sound terrible at first, but man, as soon as that bass drum hits, you're just going to love it. And the second thing that I would say, just to fathers in general, my probably biggest takeaway of raising my daughter is allow yourself to be emotional. Men don't like to be emotional. We don't like to be vulnerable. And Jake, you and I have talked about this too, especially when you've been talking about, some of the issues that you've had with your oldest. Allow yourself to feel their emotions. Put yourself in their shoes, walk through it. Yes, you might be mad. Yes, you might be angry. You might be disappointed, whatever that is. But the more you can relate to your child on an emotional level, the stronger your bond will become. So that would be my advice. I want to shout out a few people who have given us some feedback this week. Jake, I don't know if anybody's given us feedback on your end about parenting, but I'm going to go ahead and just read some of the comments that we had on our social media. A friend of the show, Brittany, says, parent the kid you have, not the one that you thought that you have. And I thought that's good, because a lot of times we end up putting expectations on our kids, and that's not really fair to them, right?
No, because I read that and I love that, because it just made me think of, you remember I was, and it's not just trying to get into ourselves, but there are lessons you learn from your own life, right? Essentially. Yeah. My family, I was a baseball player. That's all I was allowed to do. Remember, I wasn't allowed to try out for any other team. I played since I was 4 years old, and my dad wanted me to be a pro pitcher, and I was doing really well, but it was one of those things, like, by the time I hit college, I was so burnt out and done with it, because I was like, fuck it. And if you're raising your child for your own vanity or to live through them vicariously or anything, don't. I mean, because enjoy the child you have. You might not like everything about it, and that can get into a lot of spectrums, but you will be so much more grateful for it. Right. So I loved that comment.
A friend of the show, Nicole, commented, your kid will teach you infinitely more than you will ever teach them. Stop rushing to the next phase. They, being the kid or the kids, are all exhausting and amazing and all over in mere moments, meaning that your parenthood, your parentage, their childhood is all over in mere moments. So while the Hollis doesn't really know how to put that into order, I hope she listens to this episode. I think I kind of talked through that. So we're good there. And last one from our social media, if you don't mind, Jake. Tabs from the Gray's Tap Room podcast. I thought she actually had for once, something pretty good to say. She said, let your kid be themselves. Don't hate on them for liking something you don't, which I think is so important, dude. Oh my God. Let them make their own decisions. And if they fail, let them fail, but be there to help pick them back up. That's so huge. I think you and I can agree with that a lot. And her last comment here is, always be available for a hug or a listening ear, and do not be too quick to judge.
I'm going to give you one piece of advice that I learned from a very close older man to me, a mentor. And then we're going to take a break. And then when I come back, I'm going to ask you the same thing. But the best piece of advice I ever think I got was, and you were sort of alluding to this, that a man only has one thing in life, and that's integrity. And if you don't have that, what are you worth?
Right.
And I mean, that has meant so much to me of how I've tried to live going forward and how I go about things and how I've changed and evolved and done all that. But let's take a quick break, because this is pretty heavy. And then when we come back, we'll get into more of this.
In a world filled with COVID and chaos, three dads bring to you a riot of entertainment every hump day.
Hump Day! We are Jordan, a.k.a. The Gnome.
Josh, a.k.a. The Dome.
AJ, a.k.a. The Stone.
And together, we're dads on Dayquill.
Between the three of us, we have 10 kids.
That we know about!
We're talking about you, Johnny Six. Sit down, turn up the volume, and crack a cold one as we bring you a glimpse into our dad lives. We break down our weekly events with our dad stories and tons of shout-outs.
Dad Corner!
We bring you dad games. We also cover music, movies, and all things entertainment. Hell, we even bring you the Stone Safe House for off-the-wall references.
Heyo!
So come check us out on your favorite podcast platform, even if you prefer certain platforms that we don't. Yeah, we're talking about you, Google Podcasts.
Meow.
Dad's out.
Welcome back into the Bleach Brothers podcast. So we left, and B-Word, I said I was going to ask you a question. So we right before the break, I told you the best piece of advice I felt like I've ever gotten from a mentor. And it was a man, but it was like, you know, you look up to certain people. And, you know, there's been many mentors in my life, whether it's a chef or, you know, just baseball or anything. But that one really struck me because it dealt with every part of my life, I feel, and it's changed me. What is probably the best one you've ever had? That's
a good question. You know, when I was expecting my ex to give birth, we were fighting, and I don't remember what we were fighting over. And I remembered that this was one of the first times that I felt my emotions get out of control. And I was just so mad. I was so mad that I was yelling and I was screaming. And I don't remember if I was calling her names. I wouldn't put it past me because I was kind of an asshole back then. But I just remember being so mad and so overcome with anger. And my uncle, who ironically, my uncle is about 15 years older than me. And I'm about 15 years older than his son. So like I'm right in the middle of the two. So I've always looked up to my uncle, but he's always been close enough in age to where when he gives advice, I tend to listen a little bit more than if somebody, at least when I was younger, than when somebody older would give me advice. And he took me for a walk that day. And he says, look, you being angry is not worth whatever you're fighting for. And not in a sense that the relationship wasn't worth fighting for, not in a sense that the baby wasn't worth fighting for, not in a sense that my point wasn't valid. He was basically saying, get your emotions in check because the emotions that you have right now are going to spin this out of control. And I don't know that that's the best advice that I've ever gotten, but I have that advice that goes into multiple layers within my life, whether it be relationships with friends, maybe somebody hurts me unintentionally, somebody spites me unintentionally, something like that. Maybe it has to do with, like you said, integrity, where I expect so much of people and they fail me. Or as a father, whether my daughter makes a mistake that I just think is like the most egregious thing that she could do, or whatever else, right? I got to a point several years after my divorce where I chose not to argue with my ex-wife anymore. And it was so freeing because, again, when we would argue, it would be nasty. And it would be, you're this, you're that, you're a piece of shit, blah, 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 blah. And it would be from both sides. And the one day I just sat there and I said, yeah, I'm never going to argue with her again anymore. Not once. And from that day, I probably haven't argued with my ex-wife in 15 years, maybe.
It is a freeing moment. I had that. I like those pieces of advice. Me being the hater I am, I will say the worst one I've ever gotten, and there's a point to this, is happy wife, happy life. And it's not because I don't want my wife happy. What I mean by that is we need to stop putting one person in a relationship, whether it's your child or anything, on a pedestal and leave the other one out, because I feel that men have heard these cliche pieces of advice, like at the wedding, like, oh, your kid must take after the mom because they're attractive, and oh, happy wife, happy life, and you're always wrong and you'll never have sex again. Ignore a lot of that bullshit. They're funny jokes. But to be honest,
are they though? They're really not that funny.
I mean, I think it's that cliche, like, ha ha, like, you know, interrupting cow, knock knock. Everybody just says it now because, you know, I don't really think it's funny, but I think people just, they don't know what else to say. Right. There are people, the problem is, there are people that actually believe that shit.
Yeah.
And what I will say is I think it has caused men to bottle up. Not that they always haven't, or not that men always, I'm trying to say it right. Not that men haven't always been bottled up.
Right.
But the fact is, I feel like it does close you off in a way where it's like, you shouldn't have fucking problems. Make your wife happy and get over it.
Right.
And that brings me to the next point. What do you think men deal with mentally that we never talk about?
Well, as a man, I can speak to that. There's a few things, man. I think for me specifically, and I'll talk about me specifically, there's a few things that I deal with just on a regular, and I've dealt with them for my entire life. Number one is men are very competitive. Like, we're raised competitive. We're raised to be the best in whatever category it is, right? Whether it be hunter or, you know, athlete or whatever else. For me, that competitiveness is exhausting. Like, I don't mind being competitive, but being competitive is exhausting. And what I mean by that is that it just takes an emotional tax on you. So when we're bottling things up, for me, I think that that's one of the things that I just don't like. Like, I don't care what people's stats are. I don't care what people's achievements are. At the end of the day, I'll focus on me and mine and get those. But another stress, man, is that we've talked about this before, is that, you know, we're told to be chivalrous. We're told to be gentlemanly. We're told to be respectful. But oftentimes we're also told to forget our needs. And that's hard, because while we're not explicitly told, hey, your needs don't matter, we're told the importance of everybody else's needs.
Put them aside.
Right. And so for us, it feels like we have to really not listen to them, not listen to ourselves internally, and really focus upon providing for somebody else, whether that be a child or a significant other or employer or whatever it might be. And I think men specifically, and me specifically, reach that point of exhaustion because we feel like we're constantly pouring ourselves out, but yet we're not refilling the bucket, if that makes sense. And so for me, man, that's like a huge thing that I deal with. But I'll just kind of turn this around. And for you, what about you? What are you dealing with?
I think men don't mentally share. I think emotions has become a newer, not a newer thing, but I think more men are emotional. I think it's also, we're getting older. And so I'm noticing more about myself, but also the friends I surround myself with, stuff like that. But I really think men do not talk about what really affects them day to day. And what I mean by that is not just putting stuff aside, or am I going to cry, or that. I think that we're so used to the rat race, whether it be a dad or anything, that competitive nature. Like, you look at it going, I need to have a really good job. I need to make a lot of money. I need to have this and that. And I think that we don't mentally think of ourselves, and self-care is not as important. And it depends on whatever facet it wants to be: exercising, eating healthy, taking mental health breaks, stress relief, stuff like that. The older I've gotten, the more people I've worked with higher mentors and better jobs, they have told me to work less. I know in the chat group, everybody likes to joke with me that I never fucking work, but I have a very high stress job. You know that. When I need to perform, I perform, but they let me take a lot of those breaks because they know the importance of that, because they've been in my shoes. They've had this job. They are aware of that. The other thing is, because when you can perform, you do sort of get that. But I think men don't like to open up mentally about any problem. You're shown that you should not show that. You should rub dirt on it and get over it. So I think that's the biggest thing, is we just don't want to share anything.
We don't like to be vulnerable because I think it makes us feel weak. It makes us feel like we're not protected anymore. Like, because again, we're in such a high, and I'm not saying let's clarify this. We're not saying all of this to discount anything that women are going through. So take that for what
we're speaking on one side of the coin. We're speaking on one.
We're speaking for what we know
from the two genders, because we're not biologists. We're speaking from one side of that.
Correct. And so I don't want to sit here and compare dicks with women, because that's not the point here. What I am saying is that for us, when we have to go out and be warriors, we have to go out and slay dragons. Okay. Again, metaphors. We have to armor up. Otherwise we're going to get killed. Right. And so I think for men, one of the ways that we armor up is we just bottle things up. We don't show vulnerability. We're not sensitive in that way. And I think it works well in places like the workplace. It works well in places like, circles of men where we're being buddies, or we're joking around or whatever. And men tend to tease each other. So it probably works well there. It does not work well individually, and it does not work well intimately.
No. And the last thing I was going to say, the other thing we're not in touch with, and I don't know if this is the perfect word for it, but is femininity, in the sense of we're masculine, but and I'm not trying to get into toxic masculinity. We've had an episode on that, and how we feel. But, there's those jokes of like, take his man card and do this. I think we try to, it goes into the competitive nature argument that you're saying. We get into this hyper masculine, you have to be one way only. Mm-hmm. I find it funny that men forever have always had to be one way, but women can be multiple ways. And that has changed. But you get what I mean? Like, that's a hardship that you deal with mentally of, I have to be this way.
Right.
Men are this way. And I don't know. Growing up, I never was told that there are different styles of men, but I've always felt that women had more individuality, if that made sense. It seemed like women had more of a choice but you're a guy. This is what you do. And so I think we don't open up with those parts of our sides of ourselves mentally. So I don't know. That's a tough question because you can go down so many roads, and that's how I feel.
Well, let me ask you this. So in the spirit of giving advice again, if you were to either talk with your younger self or you're also addressing younger people, younger individuals, what advice would you give them, or how would you talk with them about this? What sort of things would you say? Not to fix their problems, but just to be able to help them coast along, or at least move forward.
Before I get into my point, because you did this earlier, I actually had some people reach out to me personally too, and this is Brianne, and she wrote to give her younger self advice for mental health or whatever. Don't drink to cover your emotions, and cut people out that are making positive changes for the better for themselves way sooner than they should have. The other one is, what does your inner dialogue sound like? And she's like, I think that's a really good one. Like, really listen to yourself. And I've talked to you about this. Like, a lot of self-reflection is very important. And then Seaball from 4 Dead Seasons, good dude, Jared, love him. He sent me, I would have to schedule a whole session with you to talk about it. But I guess the main thing I would love to say is it would be, learn to love yourself and tend to the necessities of life, work harder, and then fuck this pit up. So yes, mosh deep, but totally agree with those. And I guess that goes straight into my point of the sense that self-reflection is a very important thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about how you feel about yourself. It's the fact that you need to realize in times you're wrong. One thing that has helped me in my relationship, and as we talked earlier about me being married and never being divorced, mind you, I was previously engaged. I had a child with another woman at a different time. But after all those relationships were said and done, I had to sit down and go, okay, fuck them for one. 2, why didn't this work out? But then 3, what was my role in why that didn't work out?
Right.
And I think people lose track of that because it's very easy nowadays, and it's always has been, to blame somebody else for your problems or what's going on, or they just sucked, so that's why they're gone. They don't know me. I mean, like, I hate that fucking quote that I see, like, if he can't handle me at my worst, he doesn't deserve me at my best. Fuck you. You're being a toxic asshole. Shut the fuck up.
Right.
Like, nobody needs to deal with somebody's worst. When people you've dealt with my worst, B-word. I'm surprised at times that we've been friends through that shit, because I can be a fucking asshole, just like you said you used to be an asshole, and I've dealt with you when you were an asshole. It's the sense that you really need to self-evaluate sometimes and look at it. And I mean, I know me and you have joked that I've came back and like I apologized too much and did that, but there are times I really sit and think, man, what did I do there? How can I fix this? How can I mend this? Or how can I go about it to prove to you that I can be better about it?
Right.
And I think that's there's a lacking of that with a lot of people.
Right.
Of self-reflection.
Well, like you, we had a couple people, or a handful of people, actually reach out to us on our social media in regard to mental health advice. So I want to be able to read these off too, because I do feel like all of these were important. McShane of McShane of Whiskey Hell podcast had a pretty good quote here. He said, "Breathe more, enjoy more, meet your own expectations, not others. You're going to be okay. And be in the moment with your family." I like the "you're going to be okay" part. Like that's one of those "this too shall pass" advice, right? So I really enjoyed that. Not to get her head too big, but Tabs from the Gray's Tap Room podcast, again, had some pretty good advice here. She said, be kind to yourself, treat yourself as you would a loved one. I think that's important, man. A lot of times we forget about ourselves and how we have to treat ourselves. So I thought that was good. She continues, your emotions are valid. Cry and scream when you get a chance, and I'll talk to that point here in a minute. It will make you feel better. Take time for yourself and stop giving everyone all of you. Again, I think that when your bucket's empty and you're giving your bucket out, whatever's in that metaphorical bucket, and it's not refilling itself, you have to take those breaks. I'm not sure if it was Michael or Matthew from the Pedestrian at Best podcast, but they said something so simple that it kind of struck me. And so I wanted to shout it out. It's not always going to be this way. And I think that is so simple, but it's so true. And last one from the Peanut Gallery here. The dudes from Wait What podcast said, you don't You don't have to carry the weight of worries on your own. Talk to your friends and family, even if you think it's not manly. And I think that that's huge. I want to say two more pieces on this, and then I also give my advice. So bear with me because I know that my talking here is going a little long. But Coach V, you and I are into sports, dude. So Coach V was a college basketball coach, died of cancer, and he has the Coach V Foundation. And one of the things that he did, one of my favorite speeches, he was accepting an award at the ESPYs, I think. But he says, quote, "And when people say to me, how do you get through life? Each day is the same thing. To me, there are three things we should do every day. Number one is laugh. You should laugh every day. Number two is think. You should spend some time in thought. And number three is you should have emotions move you to tears. It could be happiness or joy, but think about it. If you laugh, you think, and you cry, that's a full day. That's a heck of a day. You do that 7 days a week, you're going to have something special. So shout out to the coach on that. And then tonight, before we were recording, I was actually watching this video. I don't know where I found it, so I can't give credit to it. But it's this guy who was talking to two people, and he says, if I give you $10 million right now, tomorrow, would you be happy? And the one person says, yeah, I'll be happy. And the second person goes, yeah, I'd be happy. And he says, okay, so if I give you $10 million, you're going to wake up tomorrow happy, right? Yeah. So he says, if I give you $10 million today, but you know that you're not going to wake up tomorrow, are you going to be happy? And they go, no. So you wouldn't take the $10 million? Absolutely not. So he says, well, so you know you're going to wake up tomorrow, or at least you think you're going to wake up tomorrow. So why aren't you as happy as if you got $10 million? And I think about that, and I think to myself, again, talking about mental health, what advice would I give? I think you have to appreciate the moments that you have, because you never know when you're out of moments, number one. Number two, I agree with everybody who gave us comments today, but I'm just going to elaborate on that a little bit more. You have to be able to spend some time with you to better you, whether that's 5 minutes, whether that's 10 minutes, whether you take a mental health day, whatever that looks like. You really have to invest the time to make you happy.
You know what's funny is somebody asked me that same question today. The way they worded it was, would you take $10 million knowing you die tomorrow, or would you, I think I was take $1,000 and live tomorrow, right? Or something like that. Yeah. And everybody was like, oh, I would take the 10,000 because I want to keep breathing. I was the only one, of course. I said, I'm taking the money. And they go, why?
Because you're
and
a degenerate.
I said, one, I'm living it, but here's the thing. I would pass it on.
Yeah.
It would make me the ultimate provider at that point, right? I would pass it to certain people. But that brings up my last piece of advice on this note that I would say is that stop trying to make people live for you. Yeah. And what that means, an important lesson, and I'll get in deep in this part with my wife, sex. There are three reasons people, I believe, get divorced. And it's sex, money, and miscommunication.
Yep.
And the third one can sort of come with, both, but money and stress and work stress. And you've told me that is one of the heaviest things ever. Sex is very important to men. It is. Mm-hmm. There are other people that have different drives. I get that. There are women that have high sex drives. I get that. But one time me and my wife were talking about it, and she goes, just because you want it doesn't mean I do. And just because I want it doesn't mean I try to come make you want it, even though we know what would happen there if my wife came up to me.
Right.
But the point is stop living certain ways to make everybody make you happy.
Right.
And so I would take the $10 million fucking dollars and make everybody else happy, because who cares? And then guess what, B-Word? You're getting a big chunk, because my lifelong dream will come true. I will be a marionette at my own funeral and dance into my own casket after sitting in the crowd and piss everybody off. But regardless, it was funny that somebody asked me that same question today.
That is funny. I would just remind you there, kindly sir, that $10 million is not going to replace your dumbass. So I don't care how much of the chunk I get. Fuck you. You're waking up tomorrow. Take the grand. And that brings us to our last point here before we close the show out. You and I have talked a lot about mental struggles personally, and we don't need to get into a lot of those tonight, as we've already been talking for a while. But what sort of things do you do to cope? Or what sort of things do you do to maintain, or to find that groove, if you will, to just have that motivation to move forward every day, to have that motivation to love yourself every day? I know, and I don't want to speak on your behalf here, and again, I don't really want to get into it, but that loving yourself for you has always been hard. And so what sort of things do you deal with that you're trying to do every single day to make sure that your life is lived valuably?
I could probably equate it to 5 things. One, I'm a stress eater, so I always enjoy good food. So I got into a great career. I love making a really good meal. I love sitting down with family. Like, you've been at my table. It is fun. My family has their little sad, mad, glad, where we go around and we say what we're sad about, what we're mad about, what we're glad about, and have our little things. But eat good food is 1. 2 is taking more time and being patient and relaxing. I am blessed with the job I have where I can do those moments. Like, I can get up a little later in the day if I want. But 3 is appreciating everybody around me within my life. And whether that's saying it out loud, showing emotion, telling them I love them, but just the graciousness of appreciation is very, very important. And that's to anybody. And that helps bring patience and everything. My job has gotten so much better the more patient I've been with people. When they've called me, go, wow, you're not going to rip me. It's like, I'm pissed. You need to do this. But at the end of the day, it's not going to solve anything. 4, drink more water. I know it sounds stupid. Stay hydrated, bro. It is very important. It's funny how diet plays a huge role. And it's not just because I'm the food guy into how you feel, but it is very important. I need to be better at exercising. But I guess, and to be upfront is, I see a counselor. We've talked about this. And so that goes into my last point, and that's communicate. And that's communicate, whether it's with yourself, whether you're religious, whether you go get help, whether you reach out to somebody, because you will be surprised who shows up behind you. Yeah. And whether you feel like nobody's there, there is always somebody out there for somebody. And communicating is key. And we've talked about men bottling up. And it's funny, my wife and I have talked about this. Me and you have talked about this, where I don't like to talk about a lot of things. And I have tried to be better. And it's helped me through the years of talking about things. It's funny, like when I give people advice to go get a lot of money in careers, right? I'll be like, well, if you don't ask for it, you're not going to get it. And I started realizing, why am I not equating that to the rest of my life? If I'm not asking for help, how am I going to get it? If I'm not asking my daughter to do this, how is that going to happen? If I'm not asking myself to wake up and be happy, how the fuck am I going to? So those would be my probably basic 5 points. What about you, B-Word?
So I don't have the same struggles that you do, but I have struggles of my own. Just to be, a little intimate with the fans here. I struggle with loneliness, which is weird, more than anything else. And the reason why I think I struggle with loneliness is because a couple things. Number one, my daughter's out of the house. Like, I no longer have a purpose there. I mean, I have a purpose there, but I no longer have that daily purpose there. I don't have a significant other at the moment, and that's not a good reason to go and get one. So I struggle with that too. But I think for me, I have to realize that when I'm feeling that, or when I'm dealing with that, I have to call people who matter. And oftentimes you always struggle with the telephone. Like, oh, I don't want to call them. I don't want to bother them. Oftentimes they're the first people to pick up. So I'll call you. I'll call, my friends, Jesse and AC. I'll call my mom. I'll call, old man Pat. I'll call just random people who I know will answer the phone, and we can chop it up for a minute, and we can sit there and chat, and we can make plans, and we can do whatever. And guess what? Pretty much that all goes away. The last thing is that I'll say, just to kind of button up this on my end, is that you have to learn to love the mirror, in a sense, where if you can't stand looking at yourself in a mirror, you've got to make some changes. And so it's really important just to understand that person in the mirror is probably more broken than you anticipate. And so start to love them one thing at a time, and then you'll finally get there.
No, and that's a very good point, because there's a new hit song out right now, Miley Cyrus, Flowers. And it really speaks to how you can be alone. You spoke to loneliness. And I will say, I feel like we are losing the sense of everything we were talking about: communication, love, empathy, all that to each other. Because whether we're wrapped up in technology or ourselves, or we can do this on our own, you will eventually need some kind of connection with somebody, where you're going to talk to a fucking volleyball for the rest of your life and end up like a crazy ass Tom Hanks crying over it when you lose it.
Swear to God, I cried over Wilson. Straight up,
Great fucking
dude.
Movie.
Great movie.
Great fucking movie.
But speaking of, man, this has been a heavy episode. I just want to thank you, obviously, for having this conversation with me tonight. Thank you to everybody who reached out to us. Honestly, the last few episodes we've been able to give feedback from social media posts and just from people reaching out. And honestly, man, I love that. I'm sure you love that just as much as us, because it not only gives us some stuff to talk about, but it also lets us know that people are out there listening to us. So appreciate that. But lastly, thank you to our Patreon subscribers. You guys are doing phenomenal stuff. We hope that you're enjoying everything with Hateful, with Hippo Happy Hour and the Stain River and everything else. And, Jake's recipes, the last ones look pretty damn good. So, thanks for that. But anyway, with that, my man, let's go ahead and end this thing. So what do you got for me?
Thanks for all the dirty talk, and come back and get sanitized.